Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Words of Life podcast with Kevin and Adam. In today's episode, we are going to finish up chapter 10 in the book of Hebrews, where we are encouraged to draw near with assurance to the throne of God. And we also have a little bit of another warning about living pure all the way to the end. So let's dive right in.
Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of God. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of God.
All right. Well, welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
I am better than you, I think. As many of you know, if you follow along, Kevin took a new position this year back in the classroom as a teacher. And as is the case with a lot of teachers, they tend to attract all of the bugs. And it's always the case right before any vacation that a teacher might get, you're gonna catch one. So yeah, Kevin is a little under the weather. You're feeling better, but you sound kind of.
Yeah, it's the only thing that's lingering here. I didn't really ever get fully, good and sick.
Right.
We start fall break today, I guess, right? It's Saturday here when we're recording this. So yesterday was the last day of classes. Wednesday, I started to feel a little crummy. My wife got me all doctored up. She works for a naturopath office, and so the only thing that's lagging behind, feel pretty good. The only thing that's lagging behind now is my voice, which by the end of the day, will probably sound better than this. But
until tomorrow morning,
until it warms up, and then it'll be back where it is. That's right.
Again, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope you get through it just fine. And you guys are also heading out of town, so I hope you travel safe. And
thanks.
You get well and are able to really enjoy your time off. So that's our prayer. All right. Well, let's just recap last week. We started chapter 10 last week. Let's go ahead and get our. How do we get that back up? There we go. We ended here all the way through verse 18 of chapter 10 last week, and it's the author is really coming to not really a conclusion per se, but he's wrapping up all of the main ideas about the things that made Jesus so superior and why it's pointless to try to hold on to the old law and the old system and all of the things that are there, because we have such a better blessing and such a better everything with Christ. He's better than the angels, better than he's the creator of the universe, and he's our high priest ultimately. And with that high priest and the sacrifice that he made it once for all time, for all people. And he sat down at the right hand of God, basically bringing that ultimate work to completion and paving a pathway for all of humans to be sanctified and to be holy if they keep his commandments and submit to his will. Instead of submitting to our own, instead of choosing our own path, like Adam and Eve did right at the beginning. Obviously the author is always referencing a lot of the prophecies and things that were spoken about Jesus in the past throughout this entire book, which is fantastic because we not only do we see the wisdom and providence of God working throughout the timeline, but we get reinforced with that knowledge that things that were spoken of hundreds of years, in most cases, prior to this event, were fulfilled in Jesus. So, you got anything you want to add to that as a recap, Kev?
Yeah, I just think as we go forward into this next section, the two things we need to remember from the start of chapter 10 that are going to be helpful. One is how he's talked about the law was a shadow, but Jesus is the reality. That's going to come up again here in a minute. In the back half of 10, and this idea right here in 18, where there is no longer any other offering for sin, right? Like that, there's no other offering now besides the one that Jesus gave. That's going to come up again in the back half here as we talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of that, for your benefit, I'll go ahead and do most of the reading for us today. We'll just take it off. So picking up in verse 19 of chapter 10 in the book of Hebrews, if you're just reading along, I am reading from the ESV, which is I grew up reading the New King James Version, but the ESV tends to be a little bit more
Reader friendly.
reader friendly in our modern day English. It doesn't use a lot of like
Yeah.
slang vernacular, but it does put things in a way that makes it just
Yeah.
easier to read and to understand. So
And yet still accurate.
yeah, still, and yes, absolutely still accurate. That's a paramount, paramount decision to make when you're looking at what translation to read. So, all right, verse 19 says, "Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." And we'll go ahead and stop right there. Right here in these first few verses, we have a therefore, and as a lot of really amazingly wise Bible scholars have said, anytime you see a therefore, you have to ask, what's the therefore? Therefore, anytime you see a word like this, therefore or however or things like that, it's always referencing what was previously stated, which we started off with our recap. So we have to remember that he was talking about that Jesus did this sacrifice once for all time, for all men, and that well, just to reference it back here, there's no longer any offering for sin. So remember, in the context of the book of Hebrews, he's speaking to a Hebrew or Jewish audience who is it's obvious that a lot of them are still wanting to hold on to the past, to the old ways, and trying to make those still be required or a part of our faith, and in order to be right with God. And he's saying that there's no need for that. Jesus did everything for us. There's no more sacrifices at the temple. There's no more any need for that, because Jesus' sacrifice was the real and not the shadow, and the shadow was the old system. And so he talks about here that we need to have confidence. We have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus. And they didn't have the confidence to enter the holy places prior. They had to use the priests, who were human and flawed. And then let us draw near with full assurance, a lot more confidence. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's his point there, right? Is under the old law, you could not ever draw near to God, right? Because the way it was set up as a shadow, right, is that God was in the most holy place, dwelling between the cherubim above the Ark of the Covenant, right? The glory presence of God, the cloud would come down and settle there. And so in a real physical and yet metaphorical way, right, that they could see, God was there and you couldn't go near him, right?
Yeah.
Only the high priest could go in only once a year, and then every year he had to redo it. The veil always remained, right? But his point before is Christ has now gone in there. He's offered that sacrifice once. He's literally torn the veil, right? When you read the crucifixion accounts. And so now his thing is the way is open, the way is enter. You can now draw near to God, which you have never been able to do under the old law. And if drawing from your point, if you want to go back to that system, you still can't draw near to God. You are not allowed to go in there, but we can, right? Mm-hmm. We have a heart that's full of assurance and faith because of what he's done, right? So we now are able, in a way we never could before, to draw near to God through the holiness of Jesus. I encourage you to do that. Take advantage of that thing you could never do in the past.
Yep, absolutely. And coming up, he's actually going to double down again on the idea that God set up a system for us to have strength and encouragement and a place to learn and a place to teach, and that is the church, right? And so when he says, let us hold fast, in verse 23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promises faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Uh, we'll stop right there. So
Yeah.
a lot of times this verse gets pulled as a verse to preach about attendance on at our
At the
weekly
worship service, right? Yeah, sure.
worship service, right? That's not the intent of no. It's an application
Is that a
for
way you
sure.
could? Sure, right.
Yeah, you could take this and say, hey, it says right here that you're not supposed to neglect meeting together. But what's the purpose behind? Why does he say this? He said because listen, we in order for us to hold fast our confession, God set up a plurality of Christians that you're supposed to surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And you can't do it alone. There's no such thing as an island Christian who's able to really succeed. If you're just an island and you're holding it all within yourself, you're not proclaiming the word, so you're not keeping the commandments anyway. But nobody can do it alone. In fact, God at the beginning made man and woman, and He said it's not good that man should be alone. God
Yeah.
made us to be social people, and He knows that in order for us to succeed in this life and to keep ourselves strong and to persevere and overcome challenges, we need each other. By design, we need each other.
Yep.
And so if we ignore or neglect the times we have agreed to get together on Sunday mornings or a weekly Bible class, or the other things that the congregation might do, the devotionals and the Bible studies and the things that we have throughout the week, opportunities for us to get together, even if it's just like a few members getting together for coffee on a regular basis. Don't neglect those opportunities, because it provides you an outlet for love and good works,
Yeah.
and encouragement.
Yeah, he's got these three these three let us statements there,
Yeah.
right? And so they are: let us draw near with a true heart,
Mhm.
let us hold fast the confession, and let us consider how we can stir up each other to good works, right? Like these are the three things he wants you to
Yeah.
do. Draw near to God, hold fast the confession,
Mhm.
stir each other up to love and good works. And all that's based on, right? All three of those things are based on the fact that we have this great high priest over the house of God, right? So all those are tied into the greatness of Jesus and who he is.
Right.
And so there's this very real connection there that he's making. The alternative of that, the alternative of drawing near to God, the alternative of holding fast to confession, the alternative to considering how to stir each other up to good works is neglecting to meet with one another,
Right.
right? If you're not meeting with one another, you're not doing those other three things, and those are all tied to the great high priest of God. So the question you have to ask is, if your habit, as he's describing here, if the habit of these people is to not be with the other saints, do you really believe in Jesus as a great high priest? Right? Because that's what it's all based on, that he's this great high priest we have. And so are you not meeting together because you don't want to draw near to God, or because you're ashamed of drawing near? You feel that you have these, that you haven't had your conscience cleared? Is it because you're not holding fast the confession of faith? Is it because you don't want to be stirred up to love and good works? Right? Like what is the reason that you're not wanting and desiring to draw together with the brotherhood that he's placed us in?
Right.
And he's tying that all to we are family because we are all in another place. Paul talked about that we are all now the children of Israel, right?
Right.
Not all Israel who are Israel, but only those of faith.
Mhm.
So we are family. We are sons and daughters of God. We are the
Yeah.
spiritual Israel. And so if you don't want to meet with the family, your family, because Christ is the high priest and he's put you there and he's bought you there and he's bought you in that place. So the connection the Hebrew author is making is, what's the disconnect between you and your high priest, right? What's the disconnect that you've got there?
Right.
And so, yeah, it's so much more than just make sure you show up on Sunday to check a box,
Yeah.
right? It's so much more than that in the Hebrew author's mind.
Yep.
And we don't know what the Hebrew author was thinking specifically about what was going on in those early days. We know there's a talk about the sacrifices and the offerings that are being made and these kinds of things. So, is it possible that people were neglecting the meeting of the saints so that they could go to the temple and participate in the sacrifices? Maybe, right? And he's trying to say, don't do that. That's not the thing you should be meeting with anymore, right?
Right.
That's
Well,
not
it is a little bit of a contrast between the Old Testament and the New. Like
certainly.
there wasn't necessarily a while the synagogue was a place for people to meet and to go, and they had like weekly and daily things. I think a lot of it was familial, like
Sure.
within the family and or individual. Like the Old System had a lot of check boxes. It had a lot of things to do, and a lot of ways to be made holy, as long as we're interacting with the priests and making sure we're doing our sacrifices and doing all these things. And there wasn't necessarily this focus on everybody working together.
Yeah, and
As
you
much.
almost kind of did by default, right? I think that
Right, by
people the reason
default,
that
but it was more of
is because
a
you're like,
cultural
we're all
thing.
Israel, right? We're
Yeah.
all Israel. So
Yeah.
everything you did, right?
Yeah.
Everything you did in your life was in community,
Yeah.
right? And so this idea that you now have a new community
Mhm.
separate from the historical Jewish community,
Right, separate
I
from your
think
nationality.
is really the challenge
Yeah.
that he's trying to address here, right? And
Yep.
I could imagine, we know there are cases in the New Testament where there's problems in churches where there's Jew and Gentile mixed, right? So maybe that has something to do with it, right? Hey,
Mhm.
you're neglecting to meet with your Gentile brethren, right?
Yeah.
Because you're so focused on doing the old law things.
Yep.
We don't know, but yeah, there's definitely this difference between you have a new community now, just like you
Right.
have everything else is new. You have a new high priest, you have a new temple, it's in heaven. You have a new sacrifice, a new covenant, and because of that, you have new community. Don't neglect to meet with them now, right? This is
Right.
it's going to have to be a conscious effort because
Yep.
in the old law, right now, certainly by the time of Rome, the Jews are scattered all over, right? But even as they're scattered all over, they're going to settle into communities of Jewishness. But under Moses's time, there was no way to avoid the community, right? You're wandering together in the wilderness, you're settling the land, like
You're
everything
together.
you did, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have to make an effort.
In
to
fact, they
meet
told
with
they
them.
were told not to
Don't meet with
mingle
anyone else, right?
anybody
Yeah.
Right.
And so, you didn't have to worry about neglecting to meet together. Everything you did, you met together.
Right.
Now he's saying, you got to make an effort now, right?
Yeah. It has to
'cause
be
it's not the way it is.
a new effort. So,
Yep.
where a lot of now I've actually heard a lot of sermons throughout my days about attendance and about the need for us to be together and all these things. And while it's very important, I have heard applications of some of these verses to be taken maybe a little, what I feel is slightly incorrect because of verse 26.
Yeah.
So we have this statement: not neglecting to meet another, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day drawing near. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. I've heard the immediate leap to sinning deliberately meaning neglecting one another.
Sure.
Now, and that being the primary focus of his intent. Now, I think that if we are deliberately choosing to not meet together with our brethren, that could
Is
be
that an
considered
example of, right?
that's an example of deliberately, willingly sinning, right? Because we are told to meet together. We're told to do this. It is one of the commands that be together. But is that the point of what he's making? I don't believe so, because in the context of the need, or the how much we need to be together, part of that is for the encouragement for me to find the strength to overcome the things that are keeping me down, all of the temptations that Satan continually puts in my path. When we are in the world and participating in worldly things, it's hard sometimes to break out of those bad habits. The best way to do that is to change your location, to change your relationships, right? And to really just surround yourself with people that are going to be watching your back.
Yeah, and I think if we read 26 through 31 here, right, we can see that he's
Right.
drawing a larger conclusion
Larger conclusion.
than just 25 into 26, right?
Mhm.
So if we're looking at that, right, 26, for if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries.
Yep.
Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Yep.
Right. So you read those verses and you're like, I don't see that the only connection he's making there is neglecting the worship service or neglecting the gathering together draws all of this.
Right.
It seems like if I start all the way back up, right, in 10 and even before, he is really wrapping up. And by the way, when we get to 26, we've gone sort of into our 4th warning, right? He's given all these different warnings throughout the book. Here's a 4th one, which we might say is the danger of drawing back, perhaps, or something like that. The danger of sinning deliberately, whatever you want to call it. But he's laying out, if we just go back up to maybe 18, I think it was, but verse 18, he says, where there's forgiveness of sins, there's no longer any offering for sin, right? So now when you jump back down here to 26, 27, etc., 26, if we go on sinning deliberately, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, right? And so he's clearly making a connection between 18 and 26. There is no other offering for sin.
Right.
Then in 26, if we keep going willingly sinning, what's going to be your payoff or your get out of jail free card? Or are you expecting there'll be another sacrifice given for you? There is not, right? No. And the sin that he's really talking about here, right? 26, if we go on deliberately sinning, what is the sin that he's really harping on? Well, you get down to 29, you have trampled underfoot the Son of God and profaned the blood of the covenant by which you are sanctified. Right. So this sin that draws this ire and this wrath of the Holy Spirit and the judgment of God is the trampling underfoot of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice and profaning the blood of the covenant. Well, what is that? That's deliberately sinning after you've received the knowledge of the truth in all of its many forms and facets, because there is no other offering by which you can be justified or sanctified.
Right.
And so, hey, friend, if in the law of Moses, which was a shadow, right? So when we go back to the shadow and the real, if the law of Moses was a shadow, and if you profaned that, if you did not follow that, if you'd set aside the law, if 2 or 3 witnesses said, yeah, he's guilty of this, you can go through the law, and many of those things said stone him to death, right? And so if the shadow required the death penalty for setting aside the law willfully, and this new covenant is superior, is real, is better. The point is, if you trampled the shadow and you died, what do you think is going to happen if you trample the real? Right? A goat had to die for you under the old law to remove your sins. Jesus gave his own blood, right? There was a physical tabernacle. There's a real temple before the throne of God itself. Right? The law was written on stone tablets. The law is written on your heart. Yeah. You died under the old law physically on the testimony of 3 witnesses. What? It's got to be more severe, right? That's just the pattern he's laying out. There's going to be a more severe punishment than just physical death, but for trampling underfoot the Son of God himself and profaning the blood of the covenant, which is better than the blood of bulls and goats, right? Yep. And so that's what he's really getting on. It's not just, let me put 25 and 26 together and pull them out of context.
Yeah, 100%.
He's drawing this conclusion from all
100%. You got to take it all into account, and also keep in mind the original audience of this, the original recipients of this letter were Jewish, and they were struggling with things right now. A part of that willful sinning might be some of the Judaizing teachers teaching that was going on.
Them,
they were adding things to Jesus's message and trying to make that, what's the word? They're just trying to bind it, right, as law, where that's not true. So, if you go on, like we talked about in the book of 1 John, the some of the idols that we
Yeah.
place in our lives. We erect these false versions of God, these false versions of the message of Christ. We altering the truth to suit our own needs or our own desires. And that's also a part of what he's talking about here, deliberately sinning after receiving the knowledge of the truth, which we've all received. So yeah, it's an amazing section, full of great warnings for us. Just don't let it bog you down and get be afraid and be scared and to think about the negative side of things, because he said at the beginning, he gave us this encouragement. Let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, because our hearts have been sprinkled clean from
Yeah.
an evil conscience. So we don't have to hold on to all of the things in the past before we're able to let them go, because we know that we've been purified and cleansed through the sacrifice of Jesus. So it's awesome. But always keep the warning in the back of your head, because that balances us out.
Yeah, there's only two sort of options he has, right?
Yeah.
You either draw near to God or you draw away, right?
Yeah.
And so he's saying you should draw near to God. Look at the great blessings it has. Why would you want to draw away? There's no benefit there, right? So it's and again, in that way, it's very Jewish in the tie into the old law, right? Where God said, "Here, I set before you blessings and cursings, right? Here they are. Choose this," right? He was saying, choose this, you'll have all good things, right? Don't choose this. Don't make me do this, right? Choose this great thing I've set before you. He's doing the same thing here. Draw near, don't pull back. There's good things over here.
All right. So we'll pick it up, just to recap verse 31 that Kevin read for us. He said, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." But, verse 32, "But recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised." So he just like I did, he says, don't focus on the negative, including a lot of things that you guys endured, the sufferings and losing your property and all these things, but you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property because you focused on the hope that is before you.
And that maybe gives us a little insight. We're reading a little between the lines here, but
a little.
You're thinking about, why would these people want to be going back to something else, right? He spent the whole time talking about how much better it is. And so you might be thinking, why would you ever want to go back? Perhaps what's happening here in 32 through 36 is people are seeing, look, if I'm suffering for being a Christian, if I'm suffering for when I was first enlightened, when I first I endured some sufferings, right? Some physical sufferings. Just like the apostles did. They were thrown in prison. They were told not to preach under this name. People were killed, etc. Perhaps what's happening is they're saying, if we just go back to doing the Jewish things, we can get out of these physical hardships we're enduring, right? That if I go back, because most of when you look at the early church history, when the time of this is likely being written, the suffering and things that are coming is not coming from the governmental Roman authorities directly, right? They don't care. Rome doesn't care at this point what you do, as long as you keep the peace and keep the taxes flowing. They really don't care. They didn't have a problem with the Jews down in Jerusalem in Jesus's day, right? They really didn't. As long as you're get your people under control, religion is a useful tool for that. Knock yourself out.
Being a Jew was an accepted thing to be
under the Roman. It was totally fine, right? It's not until later where you get like, hey, you must worship the emperor as God, and these kinds of things that they start running into trouble. But what's happening in the early church, we see the persecution is coming from the Jewish authorities going and then saying, hey, these people don't keep the customs and the law. Hey, they're insurrectionists. Hey, they're whatever, and bringing it to the Roman authorities, and that's how people end up in prison and etc. And their stuff seized, all that type of stuff.
Right.
And so, what was one good way to get out of that? It seems, well, if I just keep doing the Jewish stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right, or if I just say, you know what, forget it, I'm going back to being Jewish, I'm going back to being Hebrew, then perhaps I can get out of those kinds of things, right?
Yep.
That might be what's happening here, because he references this in sort of a weird. What? When did that happen? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How would that have stopped? Oh, well, maybe, right. And that could be a good motivation to why you go back to Judaism, right?
Yep.
And he's saying, hey, when you think about that, though, think about not, hey, how can I get away from that? Think about how you joyfully accepted. Think about how you endured that. You endured that because you knew these things were temporal. You knew you had an abiding promise, a real rest that it's promised, right? And then why would you give that up, right? Don't throw away the confidence and the great reward just to get out of a little suffering.
Yeah.
Seems to be what he's trying to, seems to be the implication. So
Yep.
that's how I read it. I don't know if that's, there's
no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, there's a big ring of truth throughout that, even though it is slightly reading between the lines, we do know that this was prior to 70 AD.
Right. So it's prior to all these problems of,
So we know that a lot of the persecution by Rome is yet to come.
Yeah.
The destruction of Jerusalem hasn't taken place yet. So what persecutions have they been speaking about? Well,
it's just stuff you read about in Acts, right?
Probably a 30 to 30-ish years, of time where they have had the opportunity to grow the new kingdom under Christ. John is still alive, so we don't know exactly. I don't know exactly when he died. So within 30 years after the Jesus was resurrected, and you have the Acts 2 event,
right.
Somewhere in there is what's happening. So
Yeah.
we know that there was a lot of persecution of the Jews. Or by the
That's
Jews.
all we read about in Acts, right?
All we read about. Yeah.
Testament, the letters of Paul, constantly the harassment of the circumcision, right?
Yep.
So it seems like that's probably what's being referenced
Yep.
here. And so he says, you need great endurance, right? You need
Yeah.
endurance to keep on doing what's promised. And
Right.
then he kind of rolls in then to his what we would be the conclusion.
And what is promised, he says, go ahead if you want to read it.
Yeah, so 37:4, yet a little while, and the coming one will come, and he will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and persevere their souls. And so he goes back like the Hebrew author does, and he says, let me pull out again from the old covenant, from the prophets. This is here's from Habakkuk 2, right? And he's just talking about here is the character and nature of God and what God likes, right? What pleases him. And so Habakkuk 2, this reference here is, I'm coming and will not delay, and the righteous ones you're going to live by faith, but the ones who shrink back and pull back, I do not have pleasure in them. And so he's saying God has not changed. Why would you think now he'd be happy with you shrinking back from what you've received, right? We're not of those people. We're not of the shrinker backers, right? We are of those who have faith and persevere, right?
Did you just say shrinker backers?
That's right. We're not the shrinker backers, right? We are those who persevere. And so that really speaks to your point previously, right? Of this, it's meant to be encouraging. Look, here's this group, but we're not in them. We're not in that group, right, guys? We're here with me. We're not in that group.
Yeah.
So hey, let's keep.
For me, this verse 39 resonates as a rally cry, or like, if you've ever been in any organized sports, the team gets together before the event, and they're pumping each other up. We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed. We're of faith, and we preserve our souls, right? I mean, let's
run out on the field. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. We're going to get out there and we're going to do it. We're going to do it together. And, that's kind of how I read this. Yeah. We are not of those who shrink back. We're not weak like those over there, who shrink back and are destroyed. We are the faithful. And because of that, we're going to preserve our souls. And that's a fantastic segue and a good place for us to wrap it up for today, I think. Yeah. This book of Hebrews is so many lessons and so much history for us to consider, so much so many lessons about just our daily lives and everything like that. But in this chapter, we have so much to be thankful for. Christ and his sacrifice and his role that he plays for us now continually in heaven he's got our back. And so all of the things that come our way in this life that that draw us to continually sin or to make us want to just be lazy and neglect getting together with our brethren and what Americans would say, going to church.
Yeah.
That all of that's important. And if you're out there and you find yourself struggling, one of the best ways to overcome things is sometimes just keep doing it, even if your heart's not necessarily in it. There's been a lot of times in my life personally that my faith has been weak, and I didn't feel like really motivated to go to church, go to worship service, to be together with people. Sometimes it was because of things that were happening within the congregation that were negative. You're just dealing with what, whatever. Sometimes things crop up, gossip or rumors or, or just, you're just worn out. But one of the things that I recall pushing myself to do is just remembering that if I just keep doing it, if I just don't let go and I just keep on, eventually those things pass and I'm strengthened, through the trial and through the just endurance, even if we don't like it. So, that's something that one of the lessons that I've learned in my life.
Yeah, and this is a good, as we think about this closing here of we're not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, right? This is the second time at least that he's done this in this letter. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 9, after he talks about, those who are going to be cursed and thorns and thistles, he says, but we are convinced of better things concerning you, brothers, right? Even though we speak like this, loved ones, concerning you, we're convinced of better things coming with salvation. And so even though a lot of times it sounds like he's really getting on these people, which he is, he's always saying, but his method is effectively, but you're not these ones, right? You're not those kinds of people. We know you're not those kinds of people. And so what he's hoping to do in that way is them say, yeah, you're right. I'm not on that group. I'm with you, right? And then I'm gonna join in and plug in, and being plugged in that way. The Hebrew author is hoping, says that you'll be encouraged by one another, right? As we read before, we'll stir each other up. And so he's saying, we believe this about you. You're not really faking it, even though you may be, right? We believe that if you want this, you desire this. And if you just get plugged in, then you'll have these things, right? Because again, not because of community, not because of anything, but because Jesus is such a great high priest. And this is the system he set up. So we know there are blessings there. So have faith, persevere to the end. And then he's going to get into a definition of faith and press onto that here in the next chapter, which will be exciting to get into.
Yeah. Chapter 11 is a famous chapter that gets referenced all the time for a lot of good reasons.
Sure.
And we're going to recall, for me, some of the sometimes little talked about characters.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, some really big
well-known characters,
and just talk about all the things that they endured. And so we have a lot to look forward to in chapter 11. God bless you all. Thank you so much for being with us throughout this study. We always like to make sure that you understand that we are here for you if you need anything. And we would love to have some more interaction from y'all. If you made it to the end, please just drop a little comment. Tell us how we did. Give us some encouragement on how we might do better. If you also have a suggestion for things we might do in the future, we'd love to hear that. And of course, even more so importantly, if you need anything, prayed about, we're happy to pray for you and to be there for you. Any last words, Kev?
No, I guess the same encouragement there, right? Go out this week, have faith, don't shrink back, right? We have a great high priest. Let's draw near to him. And as we do that, we'll draw near to God.
All right. And of course, pray for Kevin as he travels and hope he gets fully healed from his cold.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Enjoy his vacation. So, all right. God bless everybody. See you next week.